Wasteland, baby. I'm in love with you. All the things yet to come are the things that have passed, like the holding of hands, like the breaking of glass, like the bonfire that burned at our work in the fight fell to. Wasteland, baby. I'm in love with you. And I love to let love soon might end, be knowing it's aching, shown in the shaking. Lately, you're my wasteland, baby. Be still my indelible friend. You are unbreaking. Though quaking, though crazy, it's just wasteland, baby. And the day that we'll watch the death of the sun, to the cloud and the cold, and those jeans you'll have on, and you gaze unafraid as they sob from the city roofs. Wasteland, baby. I'm in love with you. And I love to let love soon might end, and be known in its aching, shown in its shaking. Lately, you're my wasteland, baby. Be still my indelible friend. You are unbreaking. Though quaking, though crazy, that's wasteland, baby. And the stench of the sea and the absence of green are the dead of all things that I've seen and unseen, are an end but the start of all things that are left to do. Wasteland, baby. I'm in love with you.
Please welcome Mark Sussman.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. As you've just heard, I am Mark Sussman. I have the privilege of being the CEO of this amazing organization, the Gates Foundation. And we are gathered here today to celebrate a quarter century of progress. And it's progress with impact, and it's progress that's due not just to the Gates Foundation, but very much to all of our partners, many of whom are here, but all around the world. But we're also very acutely aware that we're gathering at a moment where we are facing literally the toughest political and economic headwinds to our agenda since we were established in 2000, and that much of that amazing progress is currently at risk. So today is also an opportunity to look forward, to confront the challenges and take a clear-eyed look at what is going to be possible in the future. As most of you have heard, thanks to a historic philanthropic commitment earlier this morning from our host, my boss, Bill Gates, we believe that notwithstanding today's setbacks, the next 2 decades still have every chance of being more impactful than the last 25. That we can and will see even more progress in the 2 key metrics we have chosen to judge ourselves on: life saved and opportunities provided for the poorest and most vulnerable here in the United States and around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Bill Gates.
Well, good morning. I'm not one for looking back much, but we've got, such incredible anniversaries this year, and particularly the 25 years of the Gates Foundation. During the 1990s, Microsoft was doing very well, and so that's when I was thinking, okay, what am I going to do with this wealth? How much should go to the kids? How much do I want to consume? And how should the bulk of it go back to society? And I was trying to figure out, was there anything dramatic, anything that would be significant that could be done? Obviously, I was spoiled by the computer revolution and how digital tools, including the software from Microsoft, had made a big difference. And it made me think about innovation, surprising innovation that could do big things. And so as I was studying these foundations from the past and the work they had done, one of the articles I ran into in 1997 by Nick Kristof, who's here with us today, talked about deaths from diarrhea. And I wrote a note on it to my dad saying, hey, this could be something we could help with. And it was through that journey that I came to understand that there was a vaccine, rotavirus vaccine, which is the cause of most diarrheal deaths. And it was being given to the rich kids, but it was not available to the rest of the kids in the world. So it was deeply ironic that we'd invented this thing, and yet it was far too expensive, and there was no funding to get it to all the world's countries. And so that was a kind of opportunity that made me super enthusiastic. So it was in the year 2000 that I made the first big gift to the Gates Foundation. It became the largest foundation in the world. I can't say enough how my parents drove my values and specifically pushed me to be philanthropic. My mom talked about to whom much is given, much is expected. Tragically, she died 32 years ago, but really shaped me in a very strong way. My dad was also quite amazing, not only encouraging me, but also he was around to help out. In fact, my dad and Patty Stonesider, who was here, did amazing work getting the foundation going while I was still full-time at Microsoft. This picture of my dad with Nelson Mandela and Jimmy Carter Holding babies infected with HIV is part of a trip they made to Africa. It's one of my favorites. They were attacked at the time by the ANC as being agents of the pharmaceutical companies because Thabo Mbeki was sort of denying that HIV was caused by the virus, and so it was a very controversial thing. The person other than my parents who influenced me a great deal is, of course, Warren Buffett. Warren influenced me before I met him in 1991. He wrote an article about giving all your money away and how leaving large sums to kids sometimes wasn't even a favor to them, and so people should think in a generous way like he was. I learned so much from Warren, both his advice to me and his example. Of course, in 2006, he decided that some of his wealth would be given away through the Gates Foundation, and probably the most generous gift ever given by somebody to someone else's foundation. We received over $43 billion in stock from Warren, and he continues to be very generous. Of course, it was very poignant last Saturday when at his 60th annual meeting, he discussed that he'll be stepping down as CEO of Berkshire, but he's still as wise as ever and had fantastic messages as part of that annual meeting that I was there with him at. So, the foundation so far, during the 25 years, has given away a little bit more than $100 billion. We started in 2001 giving a bit over $1 billion. You can see that it grows, including particularly after the Buffett gift in 2006. And then you can see what it's been spent on. We picked two big causes, education and health would be our main ones. Health here we've split into two categories. Our health work is both discovery, where we create new tools and make them very, very inexpensive, and then healthcare delivery, where with partners we finance these tools so they can get out to everyone in the world. The discovery piece, we can fund a lot of that ourselves. Areas like malaria, TB, we're big funders. We invite other people in. But the place that we're not nearly large enough to achieve what should be done is in the delivery piece. And that's where we've had other philanthropies, but also rich world governments that have given between 1% to 2% of their budget for these global health causes. And the work in global health in terms of measuring the results, making sure we're having an impact, from the year 2000 to today, we've come a long ways. And a lot of this, can best be summarized in terms of saving lives. Now, it's daunting when you talk about saving millions of lives or tens of millions of lives. It's somehow not as evocative if I put up, one person's picture and said we saved that person. But in fact, we can think of the parents and the communities and how impactful this is. In fact, we got a short clip that hopefully will bring that home.
Baby Lina, Mommy.
two very specific memories for me. One is being in a malaria ward in Kenya with over 40 children and being told that half of those kids would not survive because of the malaria they were experiencing. Another experience was in South Africa, where I was meeting with the parents of a child that had died, and they had been asked for permission for us to do what we call a minimal invasive autopsy, which allows us to see exactly what caused the death. And the parents talked about how they were proud to give permission because it would mean that less parents would have to go through what they were going through. So the overall picture is the graph that's my favorite ever, showing this progress. Childhood deaths have been coming down for hundreds of years, but the period by far of the greatest progress reducing childhood deaths is the last 25 years. It was it's almost 10 million at the turn of the century, and now a bit below 5 million. Now, how do we do it? That's something to wish for, but how do you achieve it? Well, it turns out children die of a pretty modest number of things. Two of the diseases are pneumonia and diarrhea. And as I said, there were great vaccines, but only available in rich countries. And so we funded the creation of new vaccines for pneumococcus and rotavirus, and we got the price of the rotavirus vaccine down to $1. This is a pneumococcus vaccine. We got that down from over $30 down to now $2, and we have a roadmap to get it down to $1. And so there was a lot of upstream work that we did, but the key partner was Gavi that we played a role in creating at the very beginning of the foundation, and it pays for these vaccines for the poorest country, and it's just miraculous the role that they've played. Another big disease, somewhat of children but also adults, is HIV, and it was soon after the turn of the century that President Bush created both the bilateral program PEPFAR and had the U.S. be the most generous participant in the multilateral global fund that also works on malaria and tuberculosis. And the work of the Global Fund has been unbelievable. We've made sure there's new drug regimens that are safer and cheaper, and made advanced purchases commitments to those, and then Global Fund takes and works with each of the countries to come out with a plan of how to get those delivered. We have incredible HIV tools that are recently discovered. Lenacapavir from Gilead is a shot that if you get, you're protected for 6 months. We're going to drive the price of that down. Merck is far along in a trial on an oral, just a pill, which we'll be able to make very cheap, that also is a protective. And further out is a way of using gene editing, not only to cure sickle cell, but also to cure HIV. And so we're going to turn that into a single shot that can be very inexpensive. The progress on malaria is not quite as dramatic as the other diseases. This is a tough disease. COVID was a setback in terms of delivering these tools. Also with malaria, you constantly get resistance. For a while, a drug called chloroquine worked, but then chloroquine resistance spread throughout Africa, and that was a huge setback. Even the bed nets that we created, that first generation of proteothroid bed nets, the mosquitoes evolved around it, and so we had to move to what we call the dual insecticide bed net. That's this one here, that by making big advanced purchase commitments now, the cost of this net is down at about $5, which is the same as that first generation net was. We have incredible tools in the pipeline. One of them is called Gene Drive, which is a way of either making it so mosquitoes can't carry malaria or that we reduce that mosquito population. So even though it's been a tough one, we do think there's a real chance in the next 20 years to eradicate malaria. One thing that, whenever you look at these statistics, important to remember is that the portion of the babies born in Africa is going up quite substantially. At the turn of the century, it's like 15%. Now it's over 25%. And so, we wish the babies would choose to be born in Scandinavia, but in fact, somehow they're choosing to be born in northern Nigeria, which makes it a challenge to make sure we give them what they deserve. The last global health thing that I'll mention is the work that we do on polio. Polio eradication starts in 1988, before we're involved in any way, and that's Rotary International and other partners going after it. And as you can see here, they made very, very rapid progress to get the numbers down. But the inset shows you recently, even though we're down at a small number of cases, it's been very hard. We have cases in Pakistan and Afghanistan that we've never gotten to zero. We have cases in Africa where a so-called vaccine-derived type 2 form of the virus has gotten out, and it's affecting a lot of children there. So we have to solve Pakistan, Afghanistan, Africa, and we have to continue to raise the money for this effort so that we can take it all the way to zero. I mentioned that education was also a big focus. There we don't have the, great. There we don't have the same miraculous result, like, twice as many people getting college degrees, but there are some exciting, important things that have been done. This shows you college completion rates going up. We've been able to back a lot of exemplar institutions, some great charter schools. A lot of the big universities, ASU, SNHU, WGA, been increasing their enrollment and doing very high-quality work. We work on curriculum, partners like Zern, Illustrated Math, Carnegie, Khan Academy, which is now bringing AI tools into the classroom and showing great progress there. Over 20,000 students who've gotten scholarships that we provided going on to do incredible work. And another area for us has been agriculture. And that might be surprising, and yet, when you study what the poorest in the world do and how you can lift them up, making sure that their crops are more productive or they suffer less seasons where they have a crop failure, it's a very big deal. And in fact, these crops are very challenged by climate change. Africa's a net food importer, but even despite the population growth and climate change, we think by improving the seeds, getting them better advice, better access to fertilizer, Africa can become a net food exporter, and we can get more nutritious foods to the children. We do things like take chicken genetics and crossbreed to have chickens that lay more eggs, a lot more healthy, and we have over 200 million of those chickens that have gone out to raise women's income. Well, I won't be able to touch on all the areas the foundation works in. Here I list some of the others. Our work on pandemics, the creation of the Giving Pledge, early work to get computers into libraries and have access there. Tuberculosis, the largest infectious disease killer, where we have an incredible vaccine trial outstanding. Sanitations, digital finance. Family planning, where we have new tools like very low-cost hormonal IUD that will be very impactful. So there's a huge pipeline of innovations in all the areas that we work in. As Mark mentioned, in a way, this is a surprising time to come together and state our optimism about what can be done, because we are in an incredible crisis. The funding cuts, the money that's been cut off from the U.S. in a very abrupt way, the pressure on Europe, where partly to raise their defense budgets, they're cutting their aid budgets, where they've been the most generous over time. It is tragic. And what it's going to mean is that for the first time in a long time, that childhood death number is going to go back up. And, so what we're facing is millions of additional deaths. Now, I believe that the case will make to the rich countries to restore this money, where we ask for somewhere between 1% to 2% of their money to save these tens of millions of lives, to create stability in growing economies, and to create the capacity to avoid pandemics emerging and sweeping worldwide. That proposition will get these resources restored over time. Also on our side, of course, is an increase in very generous philanthropists. We have a number of our great philanthropic partners here today. Tobacco is one of the programs that there's been great progress, and we're not the largest funder there. It's actually Bloomberg, who works with us in many areas. Has been the leader in all of that. So you're going to hear more from us on this crisis. In late June, we have a Gavi fundraising in Brussels, and I'm afraid it probably won't be very good news. The metric is, can we raise as much as we did 5 years ago, or is it going to be 50 or 60% as much? And that's going to mean not being able to buy vaccines that we've been able to in the past. The pipeline of innovations, I'll just mention a few that I'm thrilled about. We're finally getting to the bottom of malnutrition. We're getting new tools that babies that are born prematurely, we can help their lungs develop so that they don't die of asphyxiation. I mentioned the malaria gene drive, the HIV gene edit cure. Some of our interventions are not as complex and technical as those. One of the ones that's had miraculous results is using this drape, which you put under a mother while she's delivering, and it's got a little cup in it that'll show you how much bleeding has taken place. And so we showed that with a very low threshold, you can save over 70% of the lives where, tragically, a woman would bleed to death, because once you see that, then you give these $2 of drugs that absolutely stop the bleeding. Our innovation pipeline is being accelerated substantially by the use of AI tools to understand biology in the cell. But what many people probably don't appreciate is how dramatic the use of AI will be for equity. We're going to use AI for delivery, and so everyone talking their local dialect with their cell phone will get fantastic health advice. Every farmer will hear about the weather, understand their soil, what seeds they should plant, what the prices are, and so they'll get advice that's better than what even a rich farmer gets today. And AI tutors, things like Khan Amigo, and being done by many partners, are already showing great promise to help in education. So these are some of the reasons we say the next 20 years can be more impactful. As part of this, something I've been thinking about for several years is being announced today, which is my commitment to put virtually all my wealth into the foundation. This is a pretty simple chart that just shows, my wealth has gone up. and that will go down. It doesn't go all the way to 0, but 98% of the way there. And to close, what's it all about? What are the values? What are the dreams? It's about ending the scourge of infectious disease. It's about having mothers survive, kids be well nourished, great education that can lead people to prosperity. Now, we won't achieve all of these things completely in the next 20 years. But I think we can, with the kind of partnerships and support from people here, we can go a long ways, and I'm very excited about that. Thank you.
So thank you, Bill. Amazing, truly amazing historic announcement in the history of philanthropy and in the Gates Foundation. And I'd now like to ask Emma Tucker, the editor of the Wall Street Journal, to come and join Bill and me on stage and ask us a few tough and challenging questions.
Well, hello again, Bill. Hello, Mark, and hello to everyone. And I just want to say it's really nice to be up here talking about an announcement which is unequivocally a piece of good news, in spite of everything else. So listen, I wanted to start where we left off with the graph there. You're giving away, I want to talk about you, Bill. Where does giving away all your wealth leave you? Are you going to have to downsize, tighten your belt?
Well, I'll be 90 by the time it's all given away. And, I'll make sure I have enough to buy pickleball rackets, tennis rackets, various things. I mostly, taking care of supporting my kids in a generous way, and so the money's there for the foundation, and it's the combination of that money plus the amount of money that's already in the foundation trust, with pretty modest assumptions about returns that makes us confident that we'll have over $200 billion in resources during the 20-year period.
I want to go back and ask a bit more about why now. What was the thinking that led you to make this announcement today? I mean, I'm assuming that this has been something you've been thinking about for a while, but what led up to the announcement?
This year is pretty unusual for me. My dad would be 100. I'll be 70, which seems like a very old age. Microsoft celebrated its 50th anniversary, and I got to do that with Steve Ballmer and Satya just a few weeks ago. And, I'll be 90 in 20 years. And, I want the Gates Foundation, which has great people, great partnerships, to be able to go full speed ahead. There will be other rich people alive and energetic, and they'll understand the geopolitics 20 years from now. They'll understand what AI has done or not done 20 years from now. So I'm not that worried that as we increase our partnerships during this 20-year period, whatever remains of this work can be done. So there's not some notion that the Gates Foundation would be around forever. There never was, but it was much further out in time. It was like 20 years after I died was going to be the sunset date before.
Actually, on that, I was going to ask, why have you chosen to close the foundation rather than have it continue its work as your legacy?
Well, the legacy I dream about is that when people see the word malaria, they go, "What was that?" I remember as a kid reading Dickens books, and they talked about consumption, and I had no idea what was consuming these people. Of course, that was tuberculosis, which, although it's gone in rich countries, it's still killing 1.3 million people a year. And so, there is no goal that the Gates Foundation would have any particular legacy. And
there's no desire for your name then to live on? I mean, not everybody's so modest.
No, there's nothing special about that. I'm very lucky to have the fortune I have. There's a lot of other people contributing to these things. Maybe I'll be remembered for my software prowess at a young age, but I think doubling down so people know that we can spend at an even greater rate than we are today, that's the best possible choice.
So you set out the challenges, the backdrop to everything that's going on, and perhaps, Mark, you could answer this question. Does the pullback on spending around foreign aid from the US and certainly from other governments, how does that affect your work? I mean, can you be more specific about the difficulties that that's creating for the foundation?
Yes, so as Bill says, the main focus on looking ahead at the next 20 years has been really us reflecting and with Bill and with the board over the last 18 months about where and how can we make the greatest impact, and really being able to chart a pathway where we can plausibly actually let you know the interventions and the steps that can be done to bring that preventable child mortality number down as close to zero as possible, to end malaria and polio, to really halt the burden of infectious diseases. But all of those are built on our lessons of successes over the last 25 years. And none of that great, amazing work was done on our own. It was done with partners across the global south, across the global north, other philanthropists. But really, if you take which two governments were our strongest partners over that first quarter century, we would have to say by volume of resources and technical expertise, they were the US and the United Kingdom. Both of those are now governments making significant cuts. The UK just announced a 40% cut to its aid budget, coming on top of some historic cuts that were made under Prime Minister Johnson. President Trump have obviously announced their intention to make significant cuts. The truth is, we simply cannot achieve that vision of goal in 2045 unless there is some continued targeted support from those partners. And so what we're doing is we're really trying to use a little bit of this announcement and the data to say, we understand there are constraints, there are real fiscal constraints facing these countries that are forcing them. But with the resources that remain, it is so critical to focus on the highest impact interventions that we know are going to save lives and build lives, and do it in an incredibly cost-effective way. As Bill showed with his vaccine props up there, we've driven down the costs of these vaccines, bed nets, tenfold over the decade. We're reaching many more people, and the low and middle income countries where we work with are also stepping up themselves, but they need some time to be able to do that, to build in the self-reliance. And so we're hoping, it wasn't the original intent, but given the reality of the moment, that our commitment to being stable and reliable over the next 2 decades at this level of resources will be a platform where we can crowd back in some of those critical high-income countries like the US and UK, but also help really build the strength within the countries and communities where we operate.
So, Bill, Bill, I was going to say you're somebody that people pick up the phone to, so it sounds to me like you need to get on that phone. When I saw you in January, you had recently seen President Trump, and you told me that you were frankly quite impressed by the way in which he listened to what you were outlining to him. Have you spoken to him since January, when we've had the announcement of these cuts, and are you still somewhat impressed?
Well, I had a really good dinner with him December 27th, and then a short meeting on February 5th where I said that what was going on with the USAID, was way beyond any of elimination of waste, and even that case where the money to prevent children getting HIV in Mozambique was misconstrued as condoms for Hamas, which just kind of shows how much thought the group that did that put into their work. So, given what he said to me in the dinner, I'm very hopeful that we won't get this scale of HIV cut, that we'll get a continued commitment to Gavi for vaccines or polio. I admit there's budget pressures and there's other voices talking to him, but I think I'll get a chance to talk with him and the Congress. And if we were able to get to something like a 15 to 20% cut, then we can be smart about which things were the lowest impact, and it won't be a tragedy. We won't have to see that death number go up. With something like HIV, where you just abruptly cut off the medicines, very quickly people's viral load goes up. And not only does their health worsen, but they start to infect other people. And so, we could literally, in the worst case, get back to the death level that we haven't seen for over a decade.
And when you talk about other voices in the ear of the president, I think you're probably referring to other tech billionaires. Have you been able to speak to Elon Musk, who hasn't hidden his very forceful thoughts around USAID? Have you been able to talk to him about where you're coming from on this?
Well, I think when it comes to knowledge of USAID, as brilliant as Elon is, I actually know more about it than he does. I've been in Nigeria and met the people who work for USAID. I've been in DRC. These are heroic people. Probably other than the military, the most heroic people who work for the U.S. government. And the work they do makes a huge difference. So his characterization of, it's a criminal enterprise, or it's worms, or, it belongs in the wood chipper, I think was not based on having much data, just like the condoms for Hamas, or, he said in a cabinet meeting that he'd accidentally cut off the Ebola prevention work but put it back on. Well, that's not true. He canceled all the Ebola work. They're all fired. They're all gone. And so objectively, I think the people who are there full-time, including the Congress, need to look at this. We may not get every program back, but the benefit to the world, the United States, particularly, for people who have religious values, I think is unarguable.
What do you think it will take to sort of tip the balance back again, beyond the work you're doing and speaking out? I mean, do you think that something might happen or some trend might appear that will shift the thinking in countries like the UK and the US, where they've, for perhaps pragmatic reasons, have stepped away?
Well, the UK has, is saying they will go back to the higher levels. I will say the 0.5% to the 0.3% came as a real surprise to us, because the Labour Party in the UK has been a champion. Gordon Brown, Tony Blair, who we worked with quite closely, did great work. And I do think, the UK voters are very proud. They were the biggest giver to Gavi. We were the second biggest. The United States was the third biggest there. They're also a huge giver to Global Fund. And so, obviously we want to get back to 0.5% and eventually to 0.7%. And there's a lot of advocates in the UK, I think, who will help us make that case.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if I just build on that a little, I think one of the challenges when you get these generic discussions about aid is you lose focus on what you're talking about. And I think what we're trying to do, what we hope our partners are doing, is that when you concretely talk about what it means, here is that video about those poor kids who did not get to live to their first birthday. And if you explain to a taxpayer in the US or the UK or anywhere in Europe that, for less than $1 of their tax expenditures, we can absolutely guarantee that that child is going to survive and have a life, and their mother will survive with them, then I think people really respond and say, I'm absolutely willing to have my tax dollars or tax pounds or tax euros devoted to that. And so it's making that case very concretely, and I think that's the same is true for political leaders. As Bill says, we've really truly believe our mission and vision, that vision that every person deserves the chance to a healthy, productive life, is an apolitical, non-partisan set of universal human values. And we believe, whether it's Republicans or Democrats here in the US, or whatever political party around the world, when you can make that case concretely, people listen and are responsive. And whatever the short-term challenges, that's a case we're going to be making very aggressively in coming weeks and months.
So just to get back to today's announcement then, and this huge 200 billion, Bill, this is perhaps an unfair question, but what do you said to the Wall Street Journal this morning that the world faces many problems. What would you most like to be able to achieve with the 200 billion that you announced today?
Well, as large as that number is, we can't do it alone. A lot of that money will go to drive creation of new tools. And there we're less dependent on others. I mean, we've had some great co-funding from the U.S. government and others on that, but the tools piece, the R&D is impactful. It is a lot smaller than the overall delivery costs. It's on the delivery piece, people may not realize, we're 20% of Gavi, so 80% is others. We're 6% of Global Fund. The only delivery thing that we are a very high percentage of is polio. We're depending on the year, we're either 40% or even somewhat more than that. And because that has a defined ending, we're willing to continue to do that as long as the other 60% continues. And the U.S. piece of that is very, very critical. We should be able to reduce childhood death faster in these 20 years than in the last 25. We have tools in the pipeline that make us very optimistic about malaria. If we just had the existing tools, no, it can't be done. We're going to change vaccines, so instead of being a shot, it's just a little patch, so they're far, far easier to deliver. We have ways of bringing the costs down. Some of our cost reduction stuff, one thing I love about it is because we're so low cost oriented, some of these things, like the way you can deal with premature babies, will apply in every country and save tens of billions of dollars and save lots of lives. The HIV cure, the single shot, which is called in vivo, that will save hundreds of billions. We do research that proves, like with the HPV vaccine, you only need 1 dose, or with the pneumococcus, you only need 2 doses. So we're going to save rich world health systems over $200 billion with the work we do, because we take such a low-cost approach to doing these things. And I don't believe the causes we work on are out of fashion. I don't see how they ever can be. But 20 years from now, you can tell me whether I was right about that or not.
So much of your work, the work that the Foundation does, revolves around vaccines. I wanted to ask, does some of the discussion and debate and misinformation around vaccines, is that affecting the work that you're doing?
Oh, absolutely. One thing to understand is whenever the U.S. casts doubts on vaccines, like the measles vaccine, you will get deaths in the United States, but you will get tens of deaths because kids here are very well nourished. And so when you get measles, it's like 4 out of 1,000 die. In Africa, where kids are not as well nourished, you get about 150 out of 1,000. And so when you cast the doubt here, it will kill 50 times as many African children, because it'll make people in those countries start to wonder, okay, are we doing the right thing with these vaccines? The reason that we haven't had as much vaccine hesitancy in these countries is because very quickly you'll see the deaths. There's the famous case where Samoa, the measles vaccine got a bad reputation. Robert Kennedy went there, and they had 53 deaths, and they said, wow. When a baby dies of measles, it's a very awful death, and it's clearly measles. It's nothing else. And so people go, whoa, we could have stopped that. And so part of the problem in the U.S. is the incredible success we've had. The two diseases, pertussis and measles, are the ones that'll start to creep up a little bit as we're more lax about this. And, we don't know whether we can ever do measles eradication or not, because the rich countries may be the limiting factor that prevents us from doing that. It is another disease that can be eradicated and should be eradicated.
And do you have any thoughts about how you combat the sort of misinformation that goes out around vaccines?
Go ahead,
Mark.
Well, we're constantly trying to sort of do that and explain. The best way to do it is, again, through the very human stories. And the reasons why vaccine take-up tends to be much stronger in parts of Africa or Asia is because the parents have seen the impact of those diseases and their children dying, and so there's a demand that gets built up. And so again, it's that storytelling element of being able to show and demonstrate and build that trust with communities and have community validators who themselves are trusted. And that's something we are looking at here in the U.S. Bloomberg Philanthropies is looking at some really important work here in the U.S. That we're going to partner with them on. And then globally, it's helping build that community-wide trust, sending the sense of message, and it needs locally credible validators. That it's great that to have a foundation like ours speaking out or showing the charts, but in the end, as always, it's about human beings affirming with each other why this is so critically important.
And Bill, you said at the beginning of your presentation that you don't often look back, but I'm going to ask you to look back now and tell us, of the many achievements that the foundation has achieved, which is your favorite?
Well, it's pretty stunning that, Gavi, which it's literally the first year of the foundation, that gets pulled together, and Global Fund, which is just a couple of years later, those are probably the most impactful things we've done. Now, those worked partly because we fund like a meningitis vaccine, and we fund many, many new vaccines and all that cost reduction. But those would still be very much at the top of the list. And they go way beyond what I expected. I remember when Bono, was saying to me he was going to, for the PEPFAR thing, ask for $7 billion. I was like, you're crazy. Really? That's a lot of money. But sure enough, President Bush decided that should be done. And, part of that's gone to Global Fund and part to PEPFAR. And there's been, bipartisan support for that work. And now, this is the first time that's being questioned, which is ironic because this is the first time we have our sight on a cure, which would actually bring the emergency to the end. So it's tragic knowing that that tool's coming, that you don't keep people alive until you can deliver it.
So I want to ask, you said this announcement has given you the opportunity to show that philanthropy can really change the world. Who do you look to carry your torch? Who are you going to ask to step up and carry the torch for you?
Well, the philanthropists we work with, some are like Chris Hahn, Mike Bloomberg, are around my age. Some are a lot younger. I think people like Mark Zuckerberg, who's an early joiner, Dustin Moskovitz and Kerry are fantastic philanthropists. I think hopefully the norms in society are increasing, that if you have huge amounts of wealth, people will look to you and say, okay, what is it how are you going to give this money back? How are you going to take the skills that you clearly demonstrated in the for-profit game and take measures that aren't profit-driven and put some of your energy into that? And I was just in India earlier this year. I was just in Singapore this week. Everywhere we go, we're creating communities of philanthropists that can work together. And, so for our work, having an Indonesian philanthropist, a Vietnamese philanthropist who are guiding our work in their country, you get our global expertise and their local knowledge, and those partnerships that are often with very young philanthropists, those are very hopeful.
Yeah, and maybe I can also just add a little bit to that, because I think the transformation of the sense of what is possible with philanthropy and really being smart about where is philanthropy truly complementary to the public sector and the private sector, that it should never be substituting for either. It has a critical role. And it was here in New York in 2006 with Patty in the room, with Warren in the room, with Melinda, with Bill, when Warren made that historic commitment that Bill talked about. And frankly, it actually was in response to that historic commitment that I joined the Gates Foundation. I never thought I would have a career in philanthropy. It truly didn't cross my mind, but I thought here is a place that I can be impactful and that really does play a role. And I think if you look back at the giving pledge that Bill, Melinda, and Warren started, the inspiration and leadership of many in the room, sort of domestically, like Mike Bloomberg and Carrie Tuna, globally like Ajay Piramal, who you'll hear from shortly, there has already been a transformation, but it's still far short of what it could or should be. We know there are the one group of people that got much wealthier over the last 7 years are the world's billionaires. And it's easier for me to say because I'm simply implement that, I think it's an incredibly powerful opportunity and example that we hope others will take and follow the generous lead that Bill and Warren and Melinda and those in the room have been setting.
Great. Well, look, we're out of time, so I want to end on a positive note. Bill, what makes you optimistic?
Well, I'm optimistic naturally, so it'd be hard to avoid that. But I'm also optimistic objectively. And, the tool that I believe in is surprising people with great innovation. And so I know, the pipeline. It's kind of ironic. I know because, the foundation is really dig into it, the short-term tragedy we're involved in with these sudden cutoffs and what that means. But, I've stayed very involved with the AI work at Microsoft and, what we understand about the immune system and the tools that are coming along. Innovation will make a huge, huge difference here. And so I think, my optimism is well justified despite an incredible emergency that we're living through right now.
Good. Okay, well, we will end there on that very positive note. Thank you both.
Thank you.
What do you do when you're facing the world's toughest challenges and it feels like the odds are stacked against you? You keep going. What do you do when you're trying to detect postpartum bleeding faster?
Postpartum hemorrhage is a total disaster. It's a big problem.
Zahira and her colleagues work tirelessly testing